Welcome to Nightverse lore! Oh geez, another dimension of naps!
Hey there, sleepyheads, glad to have you back. Before we slip into tonight's tale, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. There are nights when the Citadel breathes differently, when the cobblestones remember every gentle footfall, and the lanterns burn with the patience of old friends keeping vigil. It was during such an hour that Kyle's rickshaw bell fell silent, not broken, but holding its breath, waiting for something it could not yet name. For 47 years, that brass bell had marked his journeys through the winding streets, its cheerful voice announcing arrivals and departures, hellos and gentle goodbyes. But tonight, as purple shadows stretched long between the tea shops and the river hummed its evening lullaby, the bell refused to sing. Cale had tried everything his weathered hands knew, polishing the brass until it caught the lamplight like captured starfire, checking the small hammer that should have danced with every bump and turn. Nothing. His rickshaw rolled through the familiar streets in uncharacteristic quiet, and he found himself listening to sounds he'd never noticed. The whisper of wooden wheels against ancient stone, the distant murmur of conversations drifting from doorways where families gathered for their evening tea, the soft rustle of prayer flags stirring in the gentle breeze. It was during this strange, silent journey that he first heard it, not crying as one might expect, but the softest hum of a lullaby that seemed to rise from somewhere beyond memory itself. The melody wrapped around his heart like a familiar shawl, though he was certain he'd never heard it before. Following the sound, he found its source curled in his passenger seat like they'd always belonged there. A sleeping child, wrapped in a blanket that looked older than the city itself, woven from threads that caught the lamplight in ways that made his eyes water with unexpected tenderness. The baby's tiny fist clutched a piece of paper, and when Cale gently unfolded it, with the patience of someone who has learned that urgent things often break, he found words written in handwriting so delicate it might have been traced by moonbeams. Teach them to fold time like origami, so that moments may open like paper flowers. Below that, a single name written with the careful love of someone saying goodbye, River. As Kyle lifted the child from the rickshaw seat, something extraordinary happened to the world around them. The harsh edges of evening seemed to soften, as if someone had breathed warmth onto a frosted window. A couple arguing outside the bakery let their voices drop to whispers, then to the kind of quiet conversation that builds bridges instead of walls. The stray cats that usually hissed and scattered gathered instead in a peaceful circle, their emerald eyes reflecting not the usual wariness of street creatures, but something approaching reverence. Even the wind seemed to slow, carrying the scent of jasmine and fresh bread instead of the day's accumulated dust and worry. River's breathing had the steady rhythm of someone who existed outside of hurry, outside of the frantic tick-tock that governed most lives in the Citadel. As Cale climbed the narrow stairs to his apartment, above Mrs. Chen's tea shop, the steps seemed to creak more gently under his feet, as if the old wood was remembering how to be quiet for sleeping children. His small rooms had always been practical spaces, a narrow bed, a table worn smooth by countless solitary meals, shelves lined with books that kept him company during long afternoons between fares. But as he settled River into a drawer lined with his softest sweaters, the apartment seemed to expand somehow, making room not just for another person, but for the possibility of something he'd never dared to name. Love perhaps, or the kind of hope that arrives, unannounced and rearranges everything simply by existing. Mrs. Chen appeared at his door the next morning with her special ginger tea and a plate of steamed buns still warm from her kitchen, as if she'd somehow known that this particular dawn would require extra kindness. She took one look at River, now awake and gazing at the world with eyes that seemed to hold starlight, and her usually practical expression melted into wonder. This child, she said in her careful, precise English, settling into the chair across from Kyle, they have what my grandmother called old soul, you can see it here. She touched her chest over her heart. They understand things that take most people a lifetime to learn. As if responding to her words, River reached toward the steam rising from Mrs. Chen's teacup. The vapor seemed to slow in its upward journey, forming shapes that looked almost like tiny dragons dancing in the morning light, or perhaps it was only the way the sunlight slanted through the window, catching the moisture in ways that made ordinary things look magical. That afternoon, when Cale wheeled his rickshaw out for the day's work, The brass bell rang clear and true for the first time since River's arrival. But its tone had changed, deeper, warmer, carrying notes that seemed to harmonize with the child's contented babbling from the passenger seat. As they rolled through the Citadel's beloved streets, Kyle noticed how people's faces softened when they heard the bell's new song. How conversations paused, not with annoyance but with gentle curiosity, as if everyone was remembering something beautiful they'd forgotten. The mystery of River was not urgent, but unfolding, like origami opening in reverse, revealing new creases and possibilities with each passing hour. Kale didn't try to solve the riddle of folding time. Instead, he simply watched and learned, carrying his precious passenger through streets that seemed to grow kinder with each gentle ring of the bell. The seasons turned gently in the Citadel, and River grew with them, not in the hurried way of most children, but like morning light spreading across cobblestones, gradual, inevitable, and somehow magical. By the time cherry blossoms began painting the streets in soft pink snow, River had discovered the particular joy of transforming forgotten paper into something that could sail. It started with the crumpled receipts from Mrs. Chen's tea shop, those thin slips covered in her careful handwriting about bok choy and jasmine tea. River's small fingers worked with the focused concentration of someone following instructions written in a language only they could read, folding corners to corners, creating creases that seemed to hold more than just paper memory. Each boat emerged different from the last, some sturdy enough to weather puddle storms, others delicate as whispered prayers, meant to dissolve quickly and carry their secrets into the city's hidden waterways. Kyle watched this daily ritual with the patient wonder of someone discovering that ordinary moments could bloom into ceremony. After their morning tea, River would gather whatever paper scraps the day had offered, a torn envelope, a grocery list, sometimes a page from an old book whose binding had finally surrendered to time. The child's hands moved with surprising skill, creating vessels that looked ready to sail, not just across water, but across the spaces between heartbeats. When the gentle rains came, turning gutters into temporary rivers and filling every depression in the ancient stones with mirror-bright pools, River would insist they stop at each watery pause during their rickshaw rounds. At every puddle, every small stream that trickled alongside the cobblestones, they would carefully place a boat and whisper something too soft for Kale to hear, though he suspected these weren't quite words in any language the city officially recognized. The boats would drift for a moment, spinning slowly in the current like dancers finding their rhythm, before disappearing around corners or beneath storm grates, carrying their mysterious cargo toward destinations that existed somewhere beyond the visible world. Kale began to notice that people seemed calmer on the days when River's boats sailed through their neighborhoods, though he couldn't quite explain why the correlation felt so natural. It was Sage who helped him understand what River was really doing. The elderly woman who tended the community garden behind the old library had been watching their daily ceremonies from her perch among the tomato vines, her weathered hands never pausing in their work, but her eyes following each small ritual with growing recognition. "My grandmother did something similar," she told Kale one evening as they sat on her garden bench, River playing quietly among the herbs, occasionally offering dandelions to the fat tabby cat who had appointed himself guardian of the mint patch. She called it planting wishes in water. The idea was that streams remember everything they touch, carry every hope toward the sea where all stories eventually gather. Sage's voice held the careful reverence of someone sharing sacred knowledge. "But this child," she continued, watching River demonstrate the proper way to pet a cat to a cluster of marigolds, "they're not just sending wishes. They're folding something precious into those boats, moments that need more room to breathe." River's vocabulary was growing in unusual directions. Instead of the typical childhood fascination with trucks and animals, they collected words like shimmer and pause and between. They would point at the space where sunlight caught dust, motes dancing in the air, and say, "time pockets," as if this were the most natural observation in the world. When Kyle asked what they meant, River would simply take his hand and stand very still, and somehow the moment would expand around them like ripples on water. The first time Kyle witnessed River's gift working consciously, it happened in Sage's garden, on an afternoon when the air hung heavy with the promise of rain. A young mother had brought her crying baby to sit among the peaceful plants, hoping the garden's serenity might soothe them both. The infant's wails seemed to pierce the gentle atmosphere, and the mother's face crumpled with exhaustion and worry. River approached them slowly, carrying a paper boat made from yesterday's weather report. They didn't speak to the mother, but simply sat nearby and began to breathe with deliberate slowness. The air around them seemed to thicken slightly, like honey warming in sunlight. The baby's cries didn't stop immediately, but they began to space themselves differently, allowing room for the mother to hear something other than distress, perhaps the underlying need for comfort, for connection, for the simple assurance that someone was listening. The mother found herself swaying in rhythm with River's breathing, and gradually the baby's sobs transformed into hiccups, then into the kind of tired whimpering that precedes sleep. When the child finally dozed in her arms, the mother looked at River with tears of gratitude and something approaching awe. "How did you know?" she whispered. River smiled and placed the paper boat gently in a puddle beside the garden bench. "Sometimes crying needs more space," they said simply, as if this explained everything. That evening, as purple shadows stretched long between the tea shops and the river hummed its evening lullaby, Cale realized that River's paper boats were more than childhood play. They were practice, preparation for a gift that was growing stronger with each passing day. The ability to give people exactly the amount of time they needed for their hearts to find their proper rhythm. The brass bell on his rickshaw rang with particular sweetness as they made their way home, its voice harmonizing with River's contented humming and the gentle splash of paper boats finding their way through the city's secret waterways, carrying wishes and stretched moments toward whatever patient sea was waiting to receive them. The paper boats had taught River about carrying wishes through uncertain currents, but it was the sight of Mrs. Chen sitting alone at her small table behind the tea shop, picking at a bowl of cold rice with fingers that trembled slightly in the morning chill, that awakened something deeper in their understanding of what people truly needed. The elderly woman wasn't hungry in the way that empty stomachs cry out, but there was a hollowness around her that spoke of meals taken in solitude, of conversations that existed only in memory. Without a word, River slipped from the rickshaw and disappeared into Cale's small apartment, returning with 2 slices of yesterday's bread, a thin layer of soft cheese, and a single tomato slice that caught the morning light like a small sun. They assembled the sandwich with the same careful attention they gave to folding paper boats, wrapping it in wax paper with corners pressed just so, then approached Mrs. Chen with the quiet reverence of someone making an offering. "For sharing the morning," River said simply, settling beside her on the wooden crate that served as her outdoor chair. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened with surprise, then softened with something approaching wonder. They ate together in companionable silence, watching steam rise from the tea shop's chimney and listening to the city's gentle awakening. When the last crumb was gone, Mrs. Chen reached over and patted River's hand with fingers that no longer trembled. "This old heart forgot how food tastes different when shared," she whispered, and River nodded as if this were the most natural wisdom in the world. From that morning forward, River began carrying sandwiches the way they carried paper boats, not as a burden, but as possibility wrapped in wax paper. Cale noticed the change immediately, the way River's small hands moved with new purpose as they selected bread from Moss's bakery, choosing each loaf with the concentrated attention of someone following instructions written in a language only they could read. Moss, the baker, whose shop filled 3 streets with the warm promise of yeast and patience, was the first to notice something extraordinary about River's selections. His bread followed predictable rhythms, soft and fragrant in the morning, beginning to firm by afternoon, ready for the soup pot by evening. But the loaves River chose seemed to exist outside these natural laws, maintaining their morning tenderness well into the day, as if time moved more gently around them. "Strange thing," Moss mentioned to Cale one afternoon, his flour-dusted hands gesturing toward a half-eaten sandwich River had left on the counter. "That bread was baked yesterday morning. Should be tough as leather by now. But look." He pressed the crust gently and it yielded like fresh dough. "Stays soft as a lullaby when your River touches it." River, overhearing, smiled and placed a small hand on the remaining bread. "Things last longer when they know they're needed," they said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that had become their signature, and Moss found himself nodding as if this explained everything. The sandwiches became River's new paper boats, Carrying nourishment through the Citadel's hidden currents of loneliness and need, they developed an uncanny ability to spot the people who required feeding, not just of the body, but of the spirit that had grown thin from too many solitary meals, too many conversations with empty chairs. There was Elena, the night nurse whose scrubs carried the weight of other people's pain, who sat on the garden bench each morning after her shift, watching the sun paint the world in colors that promised rest. River would appear with a sandwich wrapped in paper that somehow stayed warm despite the morning chill. And they would share the comfortable silence of two people who understood that healing sometimes required nothing more than the presence of someone who cared. There was old Henrik, the street sweeper who moved through the dawn hours like a ghost, collecting the city's discarded dreams along with its litter. River found him resting against the fountain one morning, his broom propped beside him like a walking stick, his eyes holding the particular exhaustion that comes from being invisible. The sandwich River offered contained more than cheese and bread. It held acknowledgement, recognition, the radical gift of being seen. Each encounter followed the same gentle pattern. River would approach with quiet confidence, offer the wrapped sandwich with a small bow, then sit nearby while it was consumed. They rarely spoke during these meals, understanding instinctively that some hungers required silence to be properly fed. When the last bite was taken, River would carefully fold the empty wax paper into a small boat and place it in the nearest puddle or planter, watching it sail toward whatever destination was waiting to receive the gift of a moment transformed. The city began to adjust its rhythm around these small ceremonies. Conversations lingered a moment longer at corners where River had shared a meal, as if the air itself had learned the value of unhurried connection. Strangers found themselves nodding to each other on streets where River's sandwiches had created pockets of communion, carrying forward the gentle contagion of acknowledged humanity. Cale watched this evolution with the patient wonder of someone witnessing a flower bloom in slow motion. His rickshaw bell seemed to ring with deeper resonance now, announcing not just their arrival, but the possibility that this particular moment might unfold into something sacred, that loneliness might transform into connection over the simple act of breaking bread together. As autumn painted the Citadel in shades of amber and rust, River's gift continued to strengthen and refine itself. The sandwiches became more than food. They became invitations to remember that the world contained kindness, that strangers could become friends over shared meals, that sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply sitting beside someone and offering them half of what you had. The brass bell's song carried these small miracles through the winding streets, and the city listened with the growing understanding that something beautiful was taking root in its heart. The sandwiches had taught River about individual hunger, but as autumn painted the Citadel in shades of amber and rust, a different kind of need began to whisper through the streets. The Festival of Floating Lights was approaching. That ancient ceremony, when the entire city would gather by the river to release paper lanterns into the star-filled darkness, each one carrying hopes and memories toward whatever patient heaven was waiting to receive them. River felt the approaching festival like a change in the air's texture, the way birds sense storms long before clouds gather. During their daily rounds with Kyle, they noticed families emerging from shops with armloads of rice paper and bamboo frames, children practicing the delicate art of balancing candles within their fragile vessels, grandparents sharing stories of festivals past when their own small hands had released wishes into the night sky. Moss, the baker whose bread had learned to stay fresh in River's presence, saved the thinnest paper for lantern making, his flour-dusted fingers working alongside River's small hands to create frames that seemed to hold light even before the candles were lit. "Strange thing," he murmured as they worked, "how your touch makes everything last just a little longer than it should. Even the paper feels stronger, like it knows it's carrying something precious." Mrs. Chen emerged from her tea shop with stories of festivals from her childhood, when her grandmother would trace lullabies onto lantern paper with brushstrokes so delicate they looked like captured music. "The songs help wishes travel higher than sorrow," she explained, watching River practice writing characters with careful, reverent strokes. Sage contributed dried orange peels for the traditional festival tea, saying sweetness helped memory float toward the stars. As the evening of the festival arrived, the Citadel transformed itself into something that existed halfway between the everyday world and the realm of dreams. Lanterns appeared in doorways like captured stars, casting warm circles of light that pulsed in rhythm with the city's collective heartbeat. Families emerged from their homes carrying their paper offerings with the ceremonial slowness of people, participating in something sacred. Moving through streets that seemed to glow from within, River and Kyle joined the gentle procession toward the main square, their own lantern swaying softly from the rickshaw's brass bell. They had written their wish together that afternoon, River's small hand guiding Kyle's weathered fingers as they brushed characters onto rice paper. "May everyone find the time they need to heal." The words seemed to shimmer faintly in the lantern's candlelight, though perhaps that was only the way evening shadows played with tired eyes. The square filled gradually, families clustering together in the comfortable intimacy of shared anticipation. Children clutched their lanterns with barely contained excitement, while grandparents settled onto blankets with the patient satisfaction of those who had learned to savor moments that arrived only once a year. The air hummed with whispered conversations and the rustle of paper dreams waiting to take flight. Near the ancient fountain, River noticed an elderly man standing alone, his lantern clutched in hands that trembled with more than just the evening chill. His paper vessel was simple, unadorned except for a single name written in script so careful it might have been traced by moonbeams. Helena. His lips moved in silent conversation with someone who wasn't there, and River understood with sudden clarity that this man needed more than just a moment. He needed the space to say goodbye to a love that had lasted 47 years. When Mayor Chen, Mrs. Chen's nephew, who had inherited both the family business and their gift for bringing communities together, stepped onto the small platform at the square's center. His voice carried easily through the gathered crowd, warm and familiar as an old friend's greeting. "Tonight, as our ancestors did before us, we offer our hopes to the sky," he said, his words creating visible puffs of breath in the cooling air. "When I count to 3, we release them together. And for one perfect moment, our individual wishes become part of something larger than ourselves." River felt something stirring in their chest, a familiar sensation that usually preceded their gentle manipulations of time's flow. But this felt different, bigger, more complex, like trying to fold origami with fabric instead of paper. They looked around at the hundreds of faces illuminated by lantern light, each person carrying their own private hopes, their own quiet needs for healing or love, or simply the assurance that tomorrow might be gentler than today. "One," called Mayor Chen, and the crowd shifted into readiness, lanterns raised toward the star-scattered sky. 2, and River felt the moment beginning to crystallize around them, like water turning to ice in slow motion. 3, 1,000 paper lanterns lifted simultaneously, their warm light creating a second constellation that rose slowly toward the first. River watched the breathtaking sight and felt their gift responding without conscious direction, stretching this moment of collective wonder like taffy warming in sunlight. The lanterns seemed to pause in their ascent, hanging suspended in the space between earth and heaven, while the crowd below held its breath in shared amazement. In that extended instant, River felt the wishes contained within each glowing vessel: a grandmother's prayer for her granddaughter's happiness, a young father's hope for steady work, a child's dream of a puppy that would love them unconditionally. But their attention focused on the elderly man, whose whispered words became audible in the strange quiet. "I miss you, Helena. I miss you every morning when I wake up and every evening when the sun sets. But look at this beauty we're part of. Look at all these hopes rising toward the stars. You would have loved this." The man's shoulders uncurled in the widened breath that River held open. He watched his lantern hover just above his fingertips, and in the trembling glow he seemed to see a face only he could recognize. His mouth shaped a thank you, meant for someone who was both gone and near. Around him, people felt their own chests loosen. Elena, the night nurse, felt the stars seem closer. Henrik, the street sweeper, stood taller as if balance had learned patience. Children laughed, but softer, like laughter wrapped in blankets. When River finally allowed time to resume its natural pace, the crowd exhaled collectively, watching their wishes disappear into the star-filled darkness. The elderly man wiped his eyes and smiled, looking somehow lighter than he had moments before. Around the square, people lingered longer than usual, reluctant to break the spell of shared wonder. their hearts still full from witnessing something that felt like magic. Conversations blossomed where silence had been keeping watch. Strangers exchanged names as if trading treasures. Mrs. Chen pressed warm cups into cool hands, and Sage tucked courage into pockets without anyone noticing how it arrived there. The brass bell on Kale's rickshaw chimed once on its own, a mellow note that settled over the square like a blanket fresh from the line. As they walked home through streets still glowing with residual lantern light, Kyle squeezed River's shoulder gently. "That was beautiful," he said simply, and River nodded, understanding that they had just experienced their first taste of what their growing gift might become when applied not to individual moments, but to the collective heartbeat of an entire community. The city itself seemed to breathe differently now, as if it had learned something important about the spaces between heartbeats, the pauses between breaths, the gentle places where time could bend toward tenderness. The weeks following the Festival of Floating Lights moved through the Citadel like a gentle tide, carrying with it the residual warmth of shared wonder and the quiet understanding that some moments change us in ways we only recognize later. River noticed how people still paused at corners where lanterns had once gathered, their faces soft with remembered light, and how conversations carried a different quality, more patient, more willing to make space for the pauses between words. Kyle felt the change too, though in his case it manifested as a sweet heaviness in his bones, the kind of tiredness that comes not from exhaustion, but from completion. His weathered hands lingered longer on familiar surfaces, the smooth brass of the rickshaw bell, the worn wood of the handlebars, the soft leather of the passenger seat that had cradled so many stories over the years. He moved with the deliberate grace of someone beginning to say goodbye to beloved things, though he spoke of it only in the language of preparation. "Time to learn the deeper songs," he told River one morning, as frost painted delicate lace patterns across their window. His voice carried the ceremonial weight of someone preparing to pass down sacred knowledge. "Every bell has its own voice, but this one—" He touched the brass surface with reverence. "This one learned to sing from all the hearts it's announced, all the stories it's carried through these streets." River understood without needing explanation. They had felt something shifting in the weeks since the festival, a growing awareness of the city's accumulated memory. The way certain doorways seemed to hum with the echoes of loving hands, how windows held reflections, not just of the present moment but of all the laughter and tears they had witnessed. The Citadel itself was teaching them, preparing them for something larger than they had yet imagined. Kyle began the lessons gently, showing River how to read the bell's different voices. Go soft brush of the thumb meant, "I am here," and "I see you." Two gentle taps translated to, "Take the time you need." A longer, deliberate ring announced, "We are ready to carry whatever you bring." River practiced these conversations with the brass, learning to speak in the language of metal and intention, discovering that the bell responded not just to touch, but to the quality of attention behind it. "The rickshaw isn't transportation," Kale explained during one of their evening talks, his voice taking on the rhythm of ancient wisdom being passed from one keeper to another. "It's a moving sanctuary, a place where people can rest between their starting point and their destination. Your job isn't speed, it's presence. You give them exactly the time they need to prepare for whatever's waiting." Mrs. Chen joined these conversations, bringing tea that steamed with memories and small cakes that tasted like comfort given form. "In my family," she shared one evening as stars emerged above the Citadel's gentle skyline, "we believe certain responsibilities choose their own inheritors. Not through blood or law, but through recognition. Heart speaks to heart, need calls to gift." Sage contributed her own understanding, speaking of her grandmother's garden, where plants had learned to respond to human emotion rather than just sunlight and water. "Some gifts skip generations," she observed, watching River coax a reluctant winter rose into bloom with nothing more than patient attention. "They wait for the right hands, the right moment when the world is ready to receive what they offer." As winter deepened, River began accompanying Kale on his rounds, learning to feel the city's moods in the way morning light fell across certain corners, recognizing which passengers needed conversation and which required the gift of comfortable silence. They discovered that the Citadel held layers of story. In the bakery where 3 generations of bread had been kneaded with love. In the library, steps worn smooth by countless feet, seeking knowledge. in the bridge where people came to whisper secrets to the patient water. The formal passing happened on a morning when the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Kyle lifted the brass bell from its familiar position, with the ceremony of someone handling something sacred. The metal was warm despite the winter chill, as if it had been storing sunlight for this exact moment. This bell has rung for joy and sorrow, for beginnings and endings, for all the ordinary miracles that make up a human life, he said, placing it carefully in River's small hands. Now it's yours to carry, along with the promise that every passenger will be treated as if their story matters. Because it does. River accepted the bell with the reverence of someone receiving not just an object, but a calling. As they attached it to the rickshaw that was now theirs, the first clear note rang out across the morning air, carrying a sound that was both familiar and transformed. The city seemed to pause and listen, recognizing in that sweet tone the promise of continued gentleness. River's first solo journey took them past every place that had shaped their understanding. Mrs. Chen's tea shop, Sage's garden, the bakery where bread learned to stay soft in caring hands. The rickshaw moved differently now, not just carrying River but responding to their growing gift, creating pockets of expanded time wherever healing was needed. The brass bell sang its new song, and the Citadel listened with the deep satisfaction of a community that had found its next keeper of gentle journeys, its guardian of the spaces between heartbeats where miracles quietly unfold. The brass bell had learned to sing with River's heartbeat, and the Citadel responded in kind. Where once the city's rhythm had been measured in hurried footsteps and impatient sighs, now it moved with the gentler cadence of someone who had discovered that arriving 5 minutes later often meant arriving exactly when needed. Passengers stepped from River's rickshaw with expressions that suggested they had traveled not just through streets, but through the kind of time that allows hearts to settle into their proper rhythm. River noticed how conversations lingered at corners where they had recently passed, how strangers made eye contact more readily in the wake of their bell's gentle voice. The city itself seemed to be learning the art of pause, creating pockets of unhurried space where small miracles could unfold without fanfare. Mrs. Chen's tea stayed warm longer in cups touched by River's presence, and Sage's flowers bloomed with unusual patience, as if they too had learned that some beautiful things were worth waiting for. It was during one of these transformed afternoons that River first became aware of the figure who had made the old stone bridge their observatory. The bridge arched gracefully over the Citadel's main waterway, its ancient stones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps and whispered confessions. People came there to tell their secrets to the patient water, trusting the current to carry away what they could no longer hold alone. The young person sitting on the bridge's low wall moved with the careful attention of someone gathering invisible treasures. Their notebook lay open across their knees, and their ink-stained fingers traced words that seemed to catch fragments of the conversations drifting around them like autumn leaves. River recognized the quality of their listening, not intrusive but reverent, as if they understood that ordinary moments often contained extraordinary grace. River guided the rickshaw to a gentle stop near the bridge's approach, drawn by curiosity and something that felt like recognition. The brass bell chimed softly, and the figure looked up with eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding. "I've been listening to your bell," they said, approaching with the careful grace of someone who had learned that sudden movements could frighten away delicate things. "It has a different song than it used to, warmer, like it's learned something new about kindness." "It's learning from the passengers," River replied simply. "Every story changes its voice a little." The young person introduced themselves as Quinn, explaining their evening ritual of collecting fragments of overheard conversations, not to intrude, but to weave them into poems that they left on park benches and tucked into library books for strangers to discover. "People say such beautiful things when they think no one is listening," Quinn said, their voice carrying gentle reverence. A mother telling her child about clouds, lovers planning a future they're not sure they can afford, friends sharing the kind of secrets that make the world feel less lonely. As Quinn spoke, River watched a man in a grey coat lean over the bridge's rail, his shoulders compressed into the shape of unspoken regret. River felt the moment tighten around him like an uncomfortable shirt and gently gave it room to breathe. The man's posture softened as he whispered to the water below, "I kept the ring in my pocket for 2 years. I waited so long I lost the chance." The expanded moment allowed his words to settle properly, and when he finally straightened, his face carried the peaceful exhaustion that follows the release of long-held sorrow. Quinn had been watching, their pencil moving quietly across the page. "You give people time to find the words they need," they observed, and River nodded, understanding that they had found someone who recognized the invisible architecture of human emotion. They began sharing the comfortable silence that develops between kindred spirits. River offered a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, whose corners were pressed just so, and they ate together while watching the bridge's gentle theater unfold. A teenager with ink-stained hands whispered to the water about a poem they'd written, but were afraid to show anyone. River widened the moment enough for courage to take root, while Quinn left a small piece of paper nearby. "You don't have to be loud to be real." The teenager found it, and smiled like a secret had chosen them. Their friendship grew through these shared observations, two souls who had learned to find wonder in the spaces between ordinary moments. Quinn taught River about the music, hidden in everyday conversations, while River showed Quinn how certain moments could be encouraged to linger, creating pockets of expanded time where beauty had room to breathe. As evening painted the bridge in shades of amber and gold, River folded a small boat from an old receipt and set it drifting toward whatever patient destination was waiting downstream. Quinn watched with understanding, recognizing in the gesture the same impulse that drove them to leave poems for strangers to find. "Tomorrow," Quinn said, not as a command but as an invitation, and River heard in that single word the beginning of something larger, a partnership that would grow like sage's perennial flowers, slowly establishing roots that would eventually make the whole garden stronger. The brass bell chimed once more as they parted, its voice carrying the harmony that comes from friendship, the particular music that emerges when two people recognize each other's hearts and decide to walk through the world together, collecting beauty and sharing it with anyone wise enough to listen. Tomorrow arrived with the gentle insistence of dawn light touching cobblestones, and with it came the understanding that River and Quinn's shared observations had revealed something the Citadel needed without knowing it was missing. Their evening conversations on the bridge had uncovered a truth both simple and profound. The city was full of people who carried sleeplessness like a secret burden, moving through the dark hours with the careful steps of those who had learned that 3 in the morning could feel like the loneliest place in the world. Quinn had been the first to give voice to what River's heart had been sensing. "They need somewhere to belong during the hours when the world pretends to sleep," Quinn observed, watching a night nurse cross the bridge with shoulders that carried the weight of other people's pain. A place where being awake doesn't feel like failure. The idea took shape slowly, like morning mist gathering into purpose. Sage offered the unused room behind the community garden, a space that had been holding its breath waiting for the right calling. Together, the three of them transformed it with the careful attention of people who understood that healing required more than good intentions. It needed the right atmosphere, the proper light, the kind of silence that invited rather than demanded. River arranged low tables and soft cushions in a gentle circle, not facing each other directly, but angled toward a center where smooth river stones and dried flowers from Sage's garden created a focal point for wandering thoughts. Quinn contributed a collection of notebooks and pencils for those who needed to write their worries into visible form, while Sage prepared her special blends, chamomile for gentle release, lavender for peace that didn't require sleep, mint for clarity when thoughts moved too fast to catch. The listening room opened on a Tuesday night when rain drummed soft percussion against the windows, and the street lamps cast circles of amber comfort through the darkness. River had moved the brass bell inside, positioning it near the door where its voice could greet arrivals with the kind of gentle welcome that suggested time moved differently here. Elena was their first visitor, arriving after her hospital shift with scrubs that still carried the fluorescent urgency of emergency medicine, and eyes that had seen too much suffering to easily find rest. She accepted a cup of Sage's evening blend with hands that trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the accumulated stress of holding other people's lives steady, while her own heart struggled to find its rhythm. River felt the woman's need for decompression, the way her nervous system was still running on crisis time, even though the emergency had passed. Gently, they expanded the moments between Elena's sips, creating space for her body to remember that it was safe to slow down. The tea stayed warm longer than physics should have allowed, and Eleanor found herself sinking into the cushions with a sigh that seemed to release weeks of held breath. Henrik appeared near midnight, his street sweeper's uniform clean, but his eyes carrying the particular loneliness that comes from moving through a sleeping city while everyone else dreams. He settled into a corner with the surprised gratitude of someone who had forgotten that kindness could find him, even in the darkest hours, accepting tea and the radical gift of being seen rather than invisible. As the night deepened, others arrived. A baker whose insomnia had made her an expert in the mathematics of dawn, a security guard whose job required alertness when the world grew quiet, a young mother whose newborn had taught her that sleep was a luxury rather than a right. Each person brought their own particular flavor of wakefulness, and River learned to adjust the room's temporal atmosphere accordingly, creating pockets of slowed time where exhausted minds could find respite without the pressure of actually falling asleep. The conversations that emerged were different from daytime talk, softer, more honest, touched with the vulnerability that comes when defenses are worn thin by fatigue. Quinn read from their collection of overheard conversations, weaving together fragments of hope and worry into something that felt like a collective prayer. The woman at the coffee shop said, "Some mornings I wake up and remember I'm stronger than I thought," Quinn shared, their voice carrying the reverence of someone handling sacred text. River watched these borrowed words settle over the group like a gentle blanket, creating connections between strangers who had been carrying similar burdens in isolation. The room itself seemed to respond to the gathering, the walls holding conversations with the same patient attention that Quinn brought to their bridge observations. Small customs emerged without announcement. A wooden bowl near the window invited people to float paper boats made from old receipts and grocery lists, each one carrying a wish for better sleep or gentler mornings. Sage added orange peel to certain cups because some hearts remembered sweetness better when it arrived warm. The brass bell learned to chime more softly, its voice becoming a whisper rather than an announcement. Paolo, a watchmaker whose pocket watch ticked too anxiously, found that River could slow the moments between his heartbeats until each second felt like a friend rather than a pursuer. "It sounds like breathing now instead of running," he said with wonder, and the room hummed with understanding. As dawn approached and the first hints of sunrise began to soften the darkness beyond the windows, visitors prepared to return to their separate lives. But something had shifted in the quality of their solitude. It no longer felt like exile, but like chosen quiet. The difference between being alone and being peacefully solitary. Elena squeezed River's hand as she prepared to leave. "This place doesn't try to fix anything," she said softly. "It just makes space for what's already there." River nodded, understanding that sometimes the most powerful healing happened not through intervention, but through witness, the radical act of making room for people to exist exactly as they were. The brass bell chimed softly as the last visitor departed, and River began preparing the space for tomorrow night's gathering, already sensing that word would spread through the city's network of sleepless souls like a gentle contagion of hope. The Citadel was learning a new rhythm, one that honored both rest and wakefulness, creating sanctuary for all the different ways a heart could beat through the quiet hours. The listening room had found its gentle rhythm in the weeks since opening, becoming a sanctuary where the city's sleepless souls gathered to share the comfortable weight of wakefulness. River had grown accustomed to the way conversations moved differently in those quiet hours. How words found space to breathe between heartbeats. How healing happened, not through urgency but through patient witness. The brass bell had learned to chime more softly after midnight, its voice becoming a whisper of welcome rather than announcement. It was during one of these peaceful gatherings that the wind began to change. At first, it moved through the streets with the restless curiosity of something searching for what it had lost, slipping between buildings and curling around corners with increasing purpose. Eleanor paused mid-sentence in her story about a patient who had smiled in her sleep, tilting her head to listen to the growing symphony outside. Henrik set down his teacup with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read the city's moods in the movement of debris across empty streets. By dawn, the wind had found what it was seeking. The old post office's attic window, faithful keeper of undeliverable mail for decades, finally surrendered its latch with a gentle sigh. Letters that had been sleeping in patient stacks suddenly took flight, spiraling into the morning air like paper birds remembering how to soar. They drifted past windows where families were sharing breakfast, settled into gardens where flowers nodded their approval, and gathered in doorways as if waiting for invitation. River stepped into the transformed streets with Quinn beside them, both understanding without words that this was not chaos, but opportunity wearing the disguise of disorder. The cobblestones were carpeted with envelopes of every size and age, some crisp with recent hope, others yellowed with the patience of decades. Each piece of paper carried the particular weight of words that had been written but never sent, love that had been felt but never expressed, apologies that had been composed but never delivered. Mrs. Chen emerged from her tea shop with baskets lined in soft cloth, approaching each scattered letter with the reverence she usually reserved for her most delicate leaves. Sage appeared with her garden gloves and the practical wisdom that came from tending things that grew in their own time. Moss arrived with twine and the understanding that some kinds of bread required longer rising than others. The community gathered organically, recognizing in the scattered papers not mess but possibility. River moved through the gentle chaos with growing certainty, their hands learning to recognize which letters carried the most urgent need for completion. A cream-colored envelope addressed in careful script to the baker who makes bread taste like home seemed to pulse with 40 years of unspoken gratitude. A child's drawing folded into an envelope marked, "For the man who sweeps away sadness," vibrated with the particular energy of appreciation that had been waiting for the right moment to bloom. The first delivery took them to Henrik's morning route, where they found him pushing his broom with the methodical grace of someone who understood that cleaning was really a form of caring. The child's drawing showed a sunrise painted in crayon colors that seemed to glow from within, with words written in careful letters, "Thank you for making our street beautiful every day." Henrik accepted the drawing with hands that trembled slightly, not from age but from the surprise of being seen, truly seen, by someone who understood that beauty could be created with a broom and patient attention. River gently expanded the moment, giving Henrik time to absorb the magnitude of this small miracle. In the stretched silence, the street sweeper's posture shifted, his shoulders straightening as he realized that his daily work had been witnessed not as mere labor, but as a form of love made visible through consistent care. The second delivery led them to the bakery, where Moss was kneading tomorrow's bread with the same careful attention he brought to all his work. The 40-year-old letter contained a recipe not for bread but for gratitude, written by a neighbor who had moved away before finding courage to share how much his morning loaves had meant during her husband's final illness. River watched Moss read the faded words, saw recognition bloom across his flour-dusted features as he remembered the woman who had always bought day-old bread and never complained about the price. As the days unfolded, River's rickshaw became a traveling sanctuary for these delayed conversations. Each delivery created ripples that spread through the community, like stones dropped in still water. Conversations lingered longer at corners where letters had been received. Strangers made eye contact more readily, on streets where forgiveness had finally found its destination, and the city itself seemed to settle more peacefully into its foundations. Quinn documented these small resurrections in their notebook, weaving the stories into poems that captured the particular magic that happens when interrupted conversations finally reach their intended hearts. The brass bell sang with deeper resonance during these journeys, its voice carrying the satisfaction that comes from witnessing love letters complete their long-delayed travels toward home. The Citadel was learning that some storms come not to destroy, but to redistribute, ensuring that words meant for healing finally reach the hearts that need them most. The letters had taught the Citadel about delayed conversations finding their destinations, and in the weeks that followed, River noticed how the city had settled into a softer rhythm. Conversations lingered at corners where forgiveness had been delivered, and doorways stayed open longer to release the kind of laughter that comes when old wounds finally heal. The brass bell on River's rickshaw sang with deeper satisfaction now, its voice carrying the accumulated joy of messages that had completed their long journeys home. It was during one of these peaceful evenings, as purple shadows stretched between the tea shops and the first stars began to prick through the deepening blue, that the city's lights flickered once, twice, then surrendered to darkness with what sounded almost like a collective sigh. The familiar hum of electricity faded into the kind of silence that cities rarely remember they can hold, leaving behind not emptiness but possibility. River felt the change immediately, not as loss but as invitation. In the sudden absence of artificial light, something else began to emerge, the soft glow of candles appearing in windows like earthbound stars, the warm spill of firelight from doorways where families gathered around hearths they had almost forgotten they possessed. The darkness wasn't empty. It was pregnant with the kind of intimacy that only emerges when usual distractions fall away and people remember they need each other in ways deeper than convenience. Quinn found River in the main square, both drawn by the same instinct that recognizes opportunity wearing the disguise of disruption. Already neighbors were emerging from apartments with blankets and thermoses, moving with the careful coordination of people discovering that community could be improvised from necessity and goodwill. The city's remembering something, Quinn observed, watching an elderly couple help each other down their front steps, their movements gentle in the candlelit darkness. Something about how we used to gather before we learned we could be alone together. River nodded, feeling their gift stirring in response to the collective need for connection. This moment wanted to expand not for one person, but for everyone, creating a pocket of slow time where the entire community could remember what it felt like to exist without. Hurry, Mrs. Chen appeared with her portable gas burner and enough tea supplies to serve half the neighborhood. Her practical wisdom, recognizing that some emergencies were really opportunities in disguise. Sage arrived with blankets that smelled like lavender and the patient smile of someone who had been expecting this moment for years. Moss brought loaves of bread still warm from his evening baking, understanding that sharing food was humanity's oldest form of prayer. As families settled onto blankets, with the ceremonial slowness of people participating in something sacred, River began to work their gentle magic. The moment expanded around them like ripples on still water, creating space for wonder to unfold without urgency. Children who usually disappeared into screens found themselves building towers from cobblestones and telling stories that began with once upon a time and wandered through territories that existed only in imagination. Elena arrived after her hospital shift, still wearing scrubs but carrying a guitar case most people didn't know she owned. In the gentle anonymity that darkness provided, she began to play songs everyone almost remembered, melodies that lived in the space between lullaby and prayer. Voices joined hers tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as people remembered that singing together was something humans had been doing long before they learned to be self-conscious. Henrik appeared with his broom transformed into a walking stick, settling beside a young mother whose fussing baby grew quiet as the street sweeper began telling stories about the secret life of cobblestones, how they remembered every footstep and kept the city's dreams safe beneath their surfaces. The baby listened with wide eyes, apparently understanding that some truths could only be shared in whispers and starlight. River moved through the gathering like a gentle current, their presence creating eddies of expanded time wherever connection needed room to breathe. A grandfather found extra moments to teach his granddaughter about constellations, his weathered finger tracing patterns against the star-filled sky. Two neighbors who had been feuding over a property line discovered they both grew tomatoes from seeds their grandmothers had saved, and in the candle-lit darkness, their argument transformed into an exchange of gardening wisdom. The shared meal began simply: Moss's bread, Mrs. Chen's tea, fragments of cheese and fruit that people had brought without planning. But in River's expanded time, each bite became communion, each shared cup a small ceremony of recognition. People who had lived on the same street for years, but never truly spoken, found themselves exchanging names, sharing stories, discovering the humanity that had been hidden beneath the bright, busy surface of everyday life. Quinn sat beside River as the evening deepened, their notebook closed for once, understanding that some moments were too precious to capture in words. "I heard from my sister today," Quinn said quietly, their voice barely audible above the gentle murmur of conversations. "Our mother's been more tired lately. Nothing urgent, but I might need to visit for a while. Help with the small things." River listened with the patient attention they had learned to give, not trying to fix or advise, but simply making space for Quinn's words to exist. "We'll make time for it," River said simply, and the certainty in their voice carried the promise that some journeys were necessary, some distances bridged by love rather than proximity. When the power finally returned near midnight, lights flickering back to life with their familiar electrical hum, no one moved immediately toward home. They sat in the restored illumination for a few moments longer, reluctant to break the spell of rediscovered community. The stars remained visible between the renewed glows, as if the sky had decided to stay a little closer to the rooftops after such a generous evening of shared wonder. The brass bell chimed once as people began to fold blankets and gather empty cups, its voice carrying the satisfaction of a community that had remembered something essential about itself. In the mixed light of electricity and lingering starlight, the Citadel settled into sleep with the deep contentment that comes from being truly seen by neighbors who had become friends in the space of a single, expanded evening. The night of shared starlight had planted seeds of connection throughout the Citadel, and in the days that followed, River watched them bloom in conversations that lingered at street corners and friendships that had discovered themselves in candle-lit darkness. But Quinn's quiet words about their mother's growing tiredness had also taken root, settling into certainty with the patient inevitability of seasons changing. They met on the bridge where secrets were whispered to patient water, and Quinn spoke with the careful steadiness of someone who had already chosen their necessary path. "She needs me for the small things now," Quinn said, their fingers tracing patterns on the stone wall. Remembering to eat lunch, finding the right words when worry makes them scatter, having someone nearby who understands that love sometimes looks like simply sitting in the same room. River listened with the gentle attention they had learned to give, expanding the moment so Quinn's words could settle properly into the space between them. The decision carried no urgency, only the quiet recognition that some journeys were callings of the heart that could not be postponed. The preparations unfolded with ceremonial slowness. River helped Quinn pack memories alongside clothing, a notebook filled with overheard conversations, a smooth stone from the bridge that had witnessed so many whispered secrets, dried marigold petals from Sage's garden, pressed between pages like captured sunshine. Each item was considered, honored, then tucked away with the reverence due to things that would need to carry home's essence across distances. Mrs. Chen appeared with a thermos of her special ginger tea, its warmth a tangible promise that comfort could travel. Sage contributed a small sachet of lavender for dreams that remember where they belong. Moss arrived with a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth that seemed to hold the bakery's morning warmth, understanding that some nourishments were meant for journeys rather than immediate consumption. River prepared their own offering with the same careful attention they brought to all their gifts, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper whose corners were pressed just so, containing not just bread and cheese, but the accumulated warmth of shared meals and quiet understanding. Hidden within the wrapper, they tucked a paper boat folded from yesterday's weather report, its delicate sails carrying a whispered wish. "May all roads lead you back to where your heart recognizes home." The farewell happened at the city's edge, where cobblestones gave way to the broader roads that led toward other places, other bridges where different secrets were whispered to different waters. The brass bell on River's rickshaw chimed once as Quinn stepped toward the waiting coach, its voice carrying both the ache of parting and the quiet certainty of eventual return. "This isn't goodbye," Quinn said, their voice steady, despite the tremor in their hands. "It's just a longer pause between conversations." River nodded, understanding that some separations were really love taking a different shape, friendship learning to exist across distances, measured not in miles but in the spaces between letters. The months that followed moved through the Citadel like a gentle tide, carrying with them the particular quality of time that accompanies waiting. River's gift adapted to solitude, creating pockets of expanded moments for their own benefit, letting morning tea steep longer than physics should allow, making sunset linger just enough to fully absorb the way light painted cobblestones in shades of amber and gold. Quinn's letters arrived like small ceremonies, each one transforming the ordinary act of checking mail into communion. They wrote of bridges that hummed with different rhythms, of markets fragrant with unfamiliar spices, of quiet afternoons spent reading aloud to a mother whose smile had grown softer but no less radiant. Always woven through these distant observations was a thread of longing for the Citadel's unique gentleness, for stars that seemed to whisper stories and water that carried wishes toward patient destinations. River responded with careful descriptions of the city's daily rhythms, how the listening room had learned to hold space for Quinn's absent voice, how Sage's garden was spelling out messages only the sky could read, how passengers still asked after the poet, who used to sit on the bridge collecting fragments of overheard beauty. Then, on an afternoon when autumn light fell through the air like liquid gold, River felt a familiar shift in the city's rhythm, a subtle expansion that announced something significant approaching. Rounding the corner toward the bridge, they saw a figure silhouetted against the setting sun, and their heart recognized Quinn before their eyes confirmed it. The reunion was not dramatic, but deeply felt. River brought the rickshaw to a gentle stop, the brass bell chiming a welcome that resonated with months of accumulated longing. Quinn turned with a slow smile that carried the contentment of someone who had journeyed far and found their way back to where they truly belonged. "I brought stories," Quinn said simply, reaching into their satchel to produce the small paper boat River had tucked into their sandwich months before. Its folds still held the original wish, slightly worn but intact. It traveled all the way there and back just like I did. River accepted the returned boat with hands that trembled slightly, understanding that some wishes knew their way home, regardless of distance. The Citadel itself seemed to hum with quiet satisfaction, welcoming back one of its own, ready to make space for new stories and the comfortable resumption of friendship that had learned to navigate any distance. The brass bell chimed once more, its voice carrying the harmony that comes when separated notes finally resolve into chord, and the city settled around them with the deep contentment of a community made whole again. Quinn's return had woven itself into the Citadel's rhythm like a familiar melody finding its harmony, but River sensed another change approaching with the patient certainty of seasons turning. Cale had grown lighter in the weeks since Quinn's homecoming. Not with illness, but with the particular transparency that comes when someone begins to exist more in memory than in the urgent present moment. River noticed it first in the way Cale's hands rested longer on familiar surfaces, the smooth brass of the rickshaw bell, the worn wood of his windowsill, the soft fabric of the quilt Mrs. Chen had made him 3 winters ago. His movements carried the ceremonial slowness of someone saying quiet goodbyes to beloved things. Though he spoke of it only in the language of contentment, the city's learned its gentleness, Kyle observed during one of their morning conversations, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed a long project reach completion. You can hear it in the way people pause before speaking, see it in how strangers help each other without needing to be asked. The bell taught them, and you taught the bell. River understood that Cale was speaking not just about the city's transformation, but about his own readiness to trust it, to continue without his guidance. The brass bell seemed to ring more softly during their daily rounds, as if it too sensed the approaching transition, and was preparing to carry forward decades of accumulated wisdom. Mrs. Chen began appearing more frequently with her special ginger tea, settling into the chair beside Cale's window, with the comfortable presence of someone who understood that some conversations happened best in silence. Sage brought small bouquets from her winter garden, their gentle fragrance filling the room with proof that beauty persists even in the darkest seasons. Quinn read aloud from their collection of overheard conversations, weaving together fragments of hope and wonder that made Cale smile with deep recognition. The morning of Cale's passing arrived dressed in frost that painted delicate lace patterns across the cobblestones, the air crystalline with the kind of clarity that makes ordinary moments feel sacred. River found him in his favorite chair, wrapped in Mrs. Chen's quilt, his face peaceful with the particular serenity that comes when pain finally releases its grip and leaves only love behind. "Time for the last lesson," he said, his voice carrying the ceremonial weight of someone preparing to share the most important wisdom. "The bell knows its songs now, and you know how to listen. But remember, every passenger teaches you something about time. Most people need it to slow down, to give them room to feel what they're feeling without pressure to move on before they're ready." River held his weathered hand with gentle pressure, expanding the moments between his breaths to give each one room to be complete. Kyle's eyes held the distant quality of someone watching a horizon only he could see, a landscape that beckoned with quiet promise. "The city will remember," he whispered. His final words barely audible above the soft sounds of the Citadel, settling into its daily rhythm. "Every kindness leaves traces. You've helped it learn to be patient with itself." The transition happened as gently as morning light touching cobblestones, Kyle's spirit releasing into the peaceful air of a room that had witnessed decades of quiet service. River sat in the expanded silence, feeling not loss but completion, understanding that some departures were really arrivals wearing different clothes. Word moved through the Citadel with the same gentle inevitability as spring moving through orchards, quiet, complete, carrying with it not shock but the soft understanding that comes when a beloved elder completes their journey. People gathered not in black, but in the muted colors of autumn leaves, carrying small lanterns and stories that needed sharing. The funeral became a celebration of gentle journeys and patient listening. River led the procession through streets that seemed to glow with accumulated kindness, pulling Kale's empty rickshaw, while the brass bell rang with a voice that carried the echo of every gentle ride he had ever given. Elena spoke of how Kale had waited patiently outside the hospital during her darkest shifts, his bell a beacon in the pre-dawn darkness that gave her permission to shed tears she hadn't known she was holding. Henrik shared how Kyle had once stopped to help him clear stubborn autumn leaves, offering tea and the kind of silent companionship that lasted decades. Moss remembered their quiet conversations over morning bread, how Kale always chose the loaf that looked like it had stories to tell. At the river's edge, the community released paper boats made from receipts and old letters, each one carrying whispered memories toward whatever patient destination was waiting to receive them. The brass bell chimed once as the flotilla drifted downstream, its voice carrying the accumulated joy of thousands of conversations, the satisfaction of countless moments when time had been given room to unfold at its proper pace. River returned to their daily rounds, with the understanding that Kyle's greatest gift had not been the rickshaw or even the bell, but the knowledge that love could be expressed through the simple act of giving people exactly the time they needed to heal, to hope, to find their way home. The city settled around this wisdom with deep contentment, and the brass bell sang its continuing song of gentle journeys and patient hearts. The weeks following Kyle's passing moved through the Citadel like a gentle tide, carrying with them the particular quality of time that accompanies profound change. River felt his absence not as emptiness, but a space that had been carefully prepared for something new to grow. The way Sage's garden held winter silence before spring's first stirrings. The brass bell continued its daily song, but its voice had deepened, carrying now the accumulated wisdom of decades alongside River's growing understanding of what it meant to be the city's keeper of gentle journeys. The community had settled into its new rhythm with the patient grace of people who understood that some changes happened not through force, but through quiet recognition. Mrs. Chen's tea stayed warm longer in cups that had been touched by kindness, and Sage's flowers bloomed with unusual patience, as if they too had learned that some beautiful things were worth waiting for. The listening room continued its nightly gatherings, offering sanctuary to souls who found the dark hours too long, too loud. It was Sage who first mentioned the child, speaking of it while trimming rosemary with scissors that kept time to an invisible metronome. "There's a young one who visits the garden near dusk," she said, her weathered hands never pausing in their work. "They sit by the old clock tower, listening to something the rest of us can't hear." The plants lean toward them like they recognize a kindred spirit. River found Echo the next evening, sitting on the worn stone steps where cobblestones met the old brick wall. The child moved with the careful attention of someone learning to read the world's subtle languages, the way morning light fell across doorways, how conversations shifted when strangers became friends, the particular rhythm that emerged when a community recognized its own heartbeat. "You're the one who makes time stretch like warm honey," Echo said simply, looking up as River approached. Their voice carried the matter-of-fact wisdom that sometimes appears in young people who have learned to listen to things adults have forgotten how to hear. "I can feel it when you do it, like the whole street takes a deeper breath." River settled beside them on the steps, understanding immediately that this meeting had been written in languages older than words. "What else do you hear?" they asked gently. Echo tilted their head, listening to something beyond the ordinary sounds of evening. The city's heartbeat, they said, placing a small hand on the cobblestones. Every person walks with their own rhythm. The baker's footsteps sound like kneading dough, steady and strong. The night nurse walks like she's carrying something precious that might break. And Henrik? Echo smiled. His steps sweep the sadness away as he goes. The brass bell on River's rickshaw chimed once, softly, as if acknowledging the presence of someone it had been waiting to meet. River felt the familiar stirring that preceded recognition, the sense that some meetings were destiny, wearing the disguise of coincidence. Their lessons began the next morning, not in a classroom but in the shared rhythms of daily life. River invited Echo to join them on their rickshaw rounds, teaching through observation and gentle practice. They would move through the winding streets, the brass bell singing its gentle song, while River pointed out the subtle shifts in the city's energy. "Listen," River would whisper as they passed a young mother struggling with a crying baby. "Her heart is beating too fast, like a bird trapped in a cage. She needs time to remember that love is patient, that crying sometimes just needs more space to transform into comfort." Echo absorbed these observations with the eager curiosity of someone discovering a hidden language. They learned to discern the difference between hurried footsteps, driven by excitement, and those compressed by anxiety, to feel the collective sigh of relief that settled over the city at dusk, and the gentle flutter of anticipation that preceded dawn. River taught them the brass bell's vocabulary. How a soft brush of the thumb meant "I see you," while two gentle taps translated to "take the time you need." Echo practiced these conversations with the metal, discovering that the bell responded not just to touch, but to the quality of attention behind it. "The bell doesn't make the magic," River explained during one of their afternoon sessions. "It just helps people remember that they deserve moments that aren't rushed, conversations that have room to breathe." Echo began carrying sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, learning that certain combinations could quiet certain worries, that a thin slice of apple could remind a mind of sweetness more efficiently than any speech. They practiced together at the bridge, where Quinn collected fragments of overheard conversations, learning to identify which hearts needed the gift of expanded time before they even knew they were seeking it. One afternoon, they encountered a young man gripping the bridge rail, his shoulders compressed with worry. Echo listened carefully, then whispered, "His heartbeat sounds like rain on a roof, too fast, too scattered. He's trying to make a decision but can't hear his own thoughts." River nodded, gently expanding the moment around the man's anxiety. The extra seconds allowed his breathing to slow, his grip to loosen, his whispered prayer to transform from panic into something approaching clarity. Echo placed a wrapped sandwich on the stone beside him without speaking, understanding that some kindnesses required no explanation. Mrs. Chen began joining their informal education, teaching Echo about the patience required to brew proper tea. "Every cup has its own timing," she explained, watching Echo practice the ceremonial movements. "Some flavors need time to develop, while others are meant to be experienced immediately. Your job is to recognize what each moment needs." Sage contributed lessons about seasonal rhythms, showing Echo how her garden followed cycles that couldn't be rushed but could be supported with proper attention. "Plants teach us about patience," she observed, watching Echo coax a reluctant winter rose into bloom with nothing more than gentle presence. As winter deepened and the Citadel settled into its quieter rhythms, River began to understand that teaching Echo was also teaching themselves about the deeper purposes of their gift. Each lesson clarified their own understanding. Each shared moment of expanded time revealed new possibilities for healing and connection. During their evening conversations in the listening room, surrounded by the comfortable presence of the city's sleepless souls, River watched Echo practice their gift with growing confidence. The child's ability to hear heartbeats in footsteps was becoming a form of diagnosis, identifying which souls needed temporal kindness before they even knew they were seeking it. Elena began arriving early to help arrange cushions, tapping the table twice when she wanted Echo to widen the minutes between sips for a new visitor. Henrik brought a small broom and showed Echo how to sweep a threshold as ceremony, explaining that clean crossings make kinder conversations. On the first evening, Echo dared to ring the bell alone. The city paused in recognition. The note didn't travel far, it didn't need to. It gathered itself close like a whisper offered in confidence. Mrs. Chen stepped to her doorway, and smiled without asking why. Moss lifted his head from his work and nodded toward the street. Sage placed a sprig of rosemary in the rickshaw's cup holder, saying simply, "For remembrance that knows the way forward." The brass bell chimed softly as they prepared to close the listening room for another night, its voice carrying the satisfaction of a community that was learning to nurture its own healers, to recognize and support the gifts that emerged from its heart, like flowers growing toward light. River felt Kale's quiet approval in the air, like the scent of jasmine at dusk, not instructing but blessing the gentle passage of wisdom from one keeper to the next. The weeks following Echo's first solo bell ring moved through the Citadel like a gentle tide, carrying with them the particular quality of time that accompanies profound recognition. River felt something stirring in their chest during their daily rounds, not urgency, but the patient certainty that comes when a long-held dream begins to take shape. The stories that arrived in their rickshaw and unfolded in the listening room were precious beyond measure, but they were also ephemeral, carried away by time's current like paper boats, disappearing around corners. It was Quinn who gave voice to what River's heart had been sensing during one of their bridge conversations. "People carry their most tender moments like pressed flowers," Quinn observed, watching a couple walk hand in hand across the cobblestones below. Hidden away, protected, but sometimes forgotten. What if there were a place where those memories could be honored, where people could remember that their small joys matter as much as their great sorrows? River understood immediately, the idea settling into their consciousness with the certainty of recognition rather than discovery. The archive of gentle moments would be more than a collection. It would be a pilgrimage site for hearts seeking proof that kindness mattered, that small gestures rippled outward in ways rarely seen but always felt. The old clockmaker's shop had been empty since Paolo's passing the previous winter, its windows dusty with the particular neglect that accumulates when no one knows quite what to do with spaces that hold too much history. River approached his nephew with the careful reverence due to someone inheriting not just property, but responsibility. Paolo would have loved this, his nephew said, running weathered hands along the workbench where countless timepieces had been coaxed back to life. He always said his real job wasn't fixing clocks, but giving people back their sense. That time could be trusted to move at the right pace. The transformation began with the community's characteristic blend of practical wisdom and gentle ceremony. Mrs. Chen contributed glass jars of every size, understanding that different memories required different kinds of containers. Her eyes held the particular brightness that comes when someone discovers their gift has found new purpose. Sage offered pressed flowers and herbs that would help preserve not just physical artifacts, but the emotional resonance they carried, each dried petal holding the memory of the garden where it had bloomed. Moss built shelves from wood that had been seasoned by decades of patient waiting, each plank carrying grain patterns that spoke of time's gentle artistry. "Some things get more beautiful the longer they wait," he observed, running his hands along the smooth surfaces that would soon hold treasures. River created the first display with items that had accumulated during their years of gentle service, a ticket stub from the night. Eleanor had attended her first concert after her husband's death. The program folded and refolded with the particular wear that comes from being touched by grateful hands. A photograph of Henrik teaching neighborhood children about the secret life of cobblestones, their faces bright with wonder at invisible work made visible. Echo contributed a drawing made by the young mother whose baby had learned to sleep during one of River's expanded moments, the crayon mark still vibrant with the joy that comes when exhaustion transforms into rest. They arranged each piece with listening posture, head tilted, as if aligning the room to a heartbeat the walls had been missing. Word of the archive spread through the Citadel with the gentle inevitability of spring moving through orchards. People began arriving with offerings wrapped in tissue paper and careful explanations. A dried rose from a first dance, a recipe card stained with evidence of meals shared during difficult times, a child's mitten that had been lost and lost again. Each disappearance and recovery teaching someone about love's persistence. Elena brought a stethoscope worn smooth by hands that had learned to hear hope even in irregular rhythms. "This helped me understand that every heart has its own song," she explained, placing it carefully in River's prepared display case. I thought it might help others remember that their rhythm matters too. The archive's first official visitor was the elderly man who had whispered to his late wife during the Festival of Floating Lights. He carried a small wooden box containing 47 years of anniversary cards, each one a testament to love's daily practice. River gave him all the time he needed to arrange them, watching weathered hands smooth each card with reverence due to sacred text. "She saved everyone," he said softly, wonder threading through his voice. "Even the silly ones I made when we couldn't afford store-bought cards. Especially those ones." As weeks passed, the archive became a place of pilgrimage for hearts seeking evidence that small joys mattered. River noticed silver threads appearing in their hair like early frost on dark grass. Not unwelcome, but marking the season after harvest when fields look bare, but soil holds promise. They found themselves arranging displays with increasing care, as if preparing a beloved guest to inherit a treasured home. Echo stepped naturally into tasks before River asked, understanding without words that some transitions happened through gentle recognition rather than formal ceremony. The brass bell was moved to the archive's entrance, its voice welcoming each pilgrim with promise that their story deserved honoring. Quinn established a reading corner where visitors could share their own gentle moments, creating a living collection that proved some treasures were meant to be shared rather than simply preserved. In soft light filtering through dusty windows, surrounded by tangible evidence of love made visible, the Citadel settled around this new sanctuary with deep satisfaction, understanding that the archive represented something essential about what they had learned together, that tenderness was strength, that small gestures carried transformative power. The city breathed more peacefully, knowing its gentle moments were being collected and honored, preserved for future generations, who might need reminding that the world contained more kindness than cruelty, more hope than despair. The archive had settled into its rhythm like a heart finding its proper beat, and River moved through its quiet halls with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed a dream take root and flourish in the world's soil. The silver threads in their hair had multiplied through the seasons, creating patterns that caught morning light, with the particular beauty that comes when time leaves its gentle signature on those who have learned to fold it like origami. River felt themselves existing increasingly, in the spaces between moments, dwelling in the pauses where healing happened and hearts found their proper rhythm. Echo noticed these changes with the careful attention of someone learning to read time's subtler languages, watching how River's hands moved with increasing translucency, as if they were becoming part of the very light they had spent years learning to stretch and shape. "You're becoming like the bell," Echo observed one afternoon as they arranged a new display, pressed flowers from a wedding that had taken place during the power outage, their petals still holding the memory of vows spoken by candlelight, not disappearing but letting more music through. River understood the accuracy of this observation. The brass bell responded to their touch with deeper resonance now, as if it recognized that its keeper was becoming part of the very time they had learned to fold and stretch. The recognition of what was approaching came not as shock, but as gentle certainty, the way dawn arrives with patient inevitability. The community sensed the shift with the intuitive wisdom that develops when people learn to listen to each other's hearts. Mrs. Chen began appearing more frequently with her special ginger tea, settling into conversations that happened mostly in comfortable silence. Sage brought small bouquets from her winter garden, their gentle fragrance filling the archive with proof that beauty persists even in the darkest seasons. Quinn read aloud from their collection of overheard conversations, weaving together fragments of hope and wonder that made River smile with deep recognition. Echo stepped naturally into the greater responsibilities, their gift having strengthened through months of patient practice. They could now hear not just individual heartbeats in footsteps, but the collective pulse of the entire community, feeling when the city needed moments of expanded peace and when it required the gentle urgency that helped healing unfold at its proper pace. The transfer of the brass bell happened on a morning when frost painted delicate lace patterns across the cobblestones, the air crystalline with the kind of clarity that makes ordinary moments feel sacred. River lifted the bell from its familiar position with the ceremony of someone handling something sacred, feeling its weight settle into Echo's small hands with the rightness that comes when gifts find their intended recipients. This bell has rung for joy and sorrow, For beginnings and endings, for all the ordinary miracles that make up a human life, River said, their voice carrying the ceremonial weight of someone preparing to share the most important wisdom. Now it's yours to carry, along with the promise that every passenger will be treated as if their story matters, because it does. Echo accepted the bell with the reverence of someone receiving not just an object, but a calling. As they attached it to the rickshaw that was now theirs, the first clear note rang out across the morning air, carrying a sound that was both familiar and transformed. The city itself seemed to pause and listen, recognizing in that sweet tone the promise of continued gentleness. River's final rides became gifts to old friends, each journey a gentle farewell that wove through the fabric of the Citadel like the last threads of a beloved tapestry. They shared one last cup of tea with Mrs. Chen, its warmth a tangible reminder of decades of quiet friendship. "You taught me that some conversations happen best in silence," River said, and Mrs. Chen squeezed their hand, her eyes bright with understanding. They sat with Sage in her garden, surrounded by the patient wisdom of growing things. River offered a small paper boat containing a single dried marigold petal. "For dreams that remember where they belong," River whispered, echoing Sage's own words from years past. Sage smiled, her weathered hands accepting the offering with reverence. Quinn joined River for a quiet journey to the bridge, where secrets were whispered to patient water, both understanding that some friendships transcended physical presence. They shared a final sandwich wrapped in wax paper, its corners pressed just so, while watching paper boats drift toward whatever patient destination was waiting to receive them. Eleanor rode with them through the hospital district, sharing stories of patients who had smiled in their sleep after River's visits, their dreams gentled by the gift of unhurried time. Henrik accepted a final ride to his favorite corner, where cobblestones held the memory of decades of patient sweeping, each stone polished by hands that had learned to see beauty in the act of caring. As evening painted the Citadel in shades of amber and gold, River felt themselves becoming part of the city's memory itself, a gentle presence in the pause between moments, in the breath between words, in the space where time bends toward tenderness. The brass bell chimed once more under Echo's careful touch, its voice carrying the accumulated joy of thousands of conversations, the satisfaction of countless moments when time had been given room to unfold at its proper pace. River's presence began to fade not with sorrow, but with the peaceful satisfaction of someone who had completed their work, who had taught a community to recognize its own capacity for gentleness. They became part of the Citadel's breathing, part of the way morning light fell across doorways where love lived, part of the reason conversations lingered at corners where kindness had taken root. The city settled around this transformation with deep contentment, understanding that River's greatest lesson had been about continuity rather than departure, that love, once planted, continues to grow even when the gardener moves on to tend other fields. And somewhere in the gentle spaces between heartbeats, River continues to ride the quiet streets, still offering the gift of unhurried time to anyone who needs it. The morning after River's gentle transformation dawned with the particular clarity that follows profound change, when the world seems to hold its breath while adjusting to new rhythms. Echo moved through the Citadel's winding streets, with the brass bell singing its evolved song, each note carrying both the accumulated wisdom of decades and the fresh promise of gifts, still learning their proper strength. The air itself felt different, not empty but full of possibility, like the pause between musical notes that makes the melody meaningful. Mrs. Chen emerged from her tea shop with her characteristic blend of practicality and wonder, pouring 2 cups by habit and placing one near the window where morning light gathered thickest. The steam rose in familiar patterns, shaping itself into the gentle dragons that had always danced above her special ginger tea, and for a moment, the room held the warmth of every conversation that had ever unfolded there. Echo accepted the offered cup, with hands that had learned River's reverence for small ceremonies, understanding that some rituals were bridges between what was and what continues to be. The archive of gentle moments had settled into its role as the city's heart, welcoming pilgrims who came seeking evidence that tenderness mattered in a world that often forgot to pause for breath. Quinn established their morning custom there, reading from River's collection of passenger stories during quiet hours when dust motes arranged themselves like constellations remembering their names. These tales spoke of moments when time had been given room to unfold at its proper pace. A grandfather teaching his granddaughter about stars during an expanded sunset, strangers becoming friends over sandwiches that stayed fresh longer than physics should have allowed. River understood something most of us forget, Quinn would say, their voice carrying the reverence due to sacred wisdom. That healing happens not in the dramatic moments we expect, but in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, where love has room to do its gentle work. Echo absorbed these stories with the eager attention of someone learning their inheritance, recognizing that each tale was both history and instruction. The brass bell had learned new songs under their care, its voice adapting to a younger keeper's growing understanding of the city's rhythms. Where River's touch had created expansive moments that unfolded like slow-blooming flowers, Echo's gift manifested as gentle percussion, heartbeats finding their proper tempo, conversations discovering their natural pauses, the city itself learning to breathe in rhythm with its most vulnerable inhabitants. Sage appeared in her garden with the patient smile of someone who had been expecting this continuation for years, teaching Echo about seasonal wisdom and the way certain plants needed time to establish roots before showing growth. Your gift is learning when to let things steep and when to serve them exactly as they are, she observed. Watching Echo practice the ceremonial movements of caring for growing things, Elena noticed the change during her midnight visits to the listening room, where Echo now helped facilitate the gatherings of sleepless souls. The quality of silence had transformed, not empty but pregnant with the kind of intimacy that emerges when usual distractions fall away and people remember they need each other in ways deeper than convenience. Henrik found his morning routes blessed by Echo's presence, the young keeper appearing at corners where loneliness gathered like morning mist, offering sandwiches that somehow contained not just nourishment but acknowledgement. As seasons turned with their old, patient logic, Echo began to notice the subtle signs that indicated their gift was still growing, still learning new ways to fold time like origami. The archive expanded organically, each new display creating space for the community's accumulating wisdom. Visitors left their own contributions, photographs of ordinary moments that had felt extraordinary, letters that had taken years to write, small objects that held the weight of love made tangible. River's presence lived on not as absence, but as grace, woven into the very fabric of a community that had learned to recognize its own capacity for tenderness. They became the feeling of cool air on a warm cheek, the unexpected comfort of a shared glance, the subtle expansion of time that allowed a worried heart to find its rhythm. The city had learned to fold time like origami, to make space for what truly mattered. And River was the gentle current that carried this lesson forward. Always, as evening painted the Citadel in familiar shades of amber and gold, Echo completed their daily rounds with the brass bell, chiming its gentle benediction over streets that had learned to hold space for healing. The sound carried across cobblestones worn smooth by generations of footsteps, past windows where families gathered for their evening meals, over bridges where secrets were still whispered to patient water. Sometimes, in the gentle spaces between heartbeats, long-time residents would swear they could hear the echo of another bell, carried on evening breezes that smelled of jasmine and fresh bread. River had become part of the light itself, a gentle presence in the pause between moments, in the breath between words, in the space where time bends toward tenderness. The city settled into sleep with the deep contentment that comes from being held by love that has learned to exist in many forms. Paper boats still drifted through the square's fountain at dusk, carrying wishes toward patient destinations. The listening room continued its nightly gatherings, offering sanctuary to souls who found the dark hours too long. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the world, if you listen very closely, you can still hear the whisper of wheels on cobblestone, carrying passengers toward whatever gentle miracle awaits them in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The rickshaw bell still rings in the early morning hours, and River is still there, still riding the quiet streets, still offering the gift of unhurried time to anyone who needs it. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.